Okay, guys, we are live.
All right. Thanks, Aiden. Welcome, everyone, to our monthly webinar series. This week, here at Perspecta, really thrilled to have a fantastic guest speaker from one of our great local customers down in Australia, who's from Roy Hill. We've got Hari here. Hey, Hari, how's it going?
Hi, everyone.
Hey, well, thanks for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Bright early morning today here in Perth, Western
Perfect.
Australia.
Excellent. It's a cold, snowy evening here outside of Philadelphia. I've got some meetings with SAP tomorrow, so I'm traveling today. But great to have you with us. And again, to all you guys joining around the world, thanks very much for joining. My name is Scott Barrett. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Perspecta. And one of my favorite things to do is to talk to our customers and find out all the really cool stuff they're doing with our MDO platform and other technologies. So again, tonight for everyone, what we're really focused on is really how to optimize your MRO costs. So all the different MRO things, spare parts that you're doing. Most companies can save a lot of money this way. You can save money one time by getting things off the shelf and retiring it and decommissioning it and obsolescence. You can find spare parts across multiple facilities. You can avoid having to order stuff at the last minute. We'll cover a lot more of that, but this really is about how to focus on your underlying data in order to achieve really efficient management of your spare parts and save a lot of hard dollar money in the process, be that Australian dollars, be it American dollars, euros, rubles. Well, probably not rubles this week or this month, so maybe different ones. So anyway, well, like I said, thanks for joining us tonight, Harry. Maybe as a good way to start, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure thing. My pleasure, Scott. So I'm traditionally a supply chain consultant. I've had about a dozen of years of SAP consulting experience in the supply chain space, having worked with companies like IBM, Shell, etc. And for about 4 or 5 years now, I've been working on the other side of the fence, which is directly with the customer, helping their supply chain departments or businesses kind of reach efficiency and innovation, helping embed new technologies for them. So I've been with Rohil for 3 years now. I was with Inpex before this, which was another big, oil and gas MRO player. And now I find myself back in technology within Rohil, so manage technology projects for them, and also responsible for their overall ERP roadmap strategy.
Very cool. Thanks. And I guess as a follow-up question, maybe you tell us a little about Roy Hill and what you guys do.
Sure thing. So Royal traditionally is in the business of digging dirt, as we say. So we just focus on one commodity, which is iron ore. You can see in the map there, the Royal mine itself is in the middle of a lot of other mines. We have the Royal tenement next to the Fortescue mines, and then also further south you'll have the BHP and some of the Rio mines. Tom Price, I'm not sure if you've seen the movie, it was probably the first mine which was discovered in Australia, the oldest mine. So Royal is special because it's probably the biggest single mine entity, a single pit entity amongst all these different mines that you see in the Pilbara. And it's a single mine operation and a completely independent pit to port operation. So Royal has its own dedicated railway from that mine site going straight up to the port headland, and we have also a purpose-built port facility. So we have 2 berths in Port Hedland, where our ships dock, where we can sail out iron ore to our customers in China, Japan, wherever the the dollars high. And we have around 2,400 staff. So this Essence snapshot was still about maybe a year old. Royal is now looking to expand. It's taking over other mine sites around this region, and we're looking to bump up our annual production from something like 60 million to almost 120, 140 million, and maybe even double our workforce strength in that process.
Wow. Very cool. Pit to port, I like that. I thought I knew all the SAP master processes until you and I started talking. That's a new one, so I like the term. So that's a great idea. In fact, it's fully verticalized the way you guys have it is also really unique, I believe, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. We kind of like to think of the whole process in systems, and how one process flows from one system to the other, rather than the traditional silo approach. So, and you'll see that when we cover how we like to link our demand and supply systems, and how we use that for optimizing our inventory.
Very cool. So have you actually been out to visit your mining facility?
We all have to, Scott. Actually, even the kind of the headquarter-based staff, like myself, we have to make around 12 trips a year.
Oh,
So you
wow.
get a good taste of living in the desert, and especially if any one of you have been to the Pilbara, swatting the flies and the heat. It's quite an interesting way to be. You always have some mosquito sprays, a couple of them on your table, and you kind of go around spraying like that. Uh, but it's quite interesting, yeah, life at the Pilbara, especially from a FIFO worker's point of view, who you would say probably spend more than half their life, half their career, just in the Pilbara, flying back and forth on
Mhm.
those grueling stints.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was like, how many at any given time? How many of your 2,400 people are at that site working?
I think 2,400 is still our full-time staff. You'll probably see around close to 1,500 of them, but then you will always have contract staff equal to our employee full strength. You'll still have around 2,000 odd contractors working for us also
Wow.
additionally on the mine sites. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's the scale of that's just always hard until you see it in person. That's why I ask if you'd visited. The scale of it is always seems it's hard for me to imagine how big that place probably is.
Yeah. So we have a dedicated camp village at site to cater for all these fly in, fly out workers, right? So
Mhm.
once you get to see that, it's really in the middle of the desert that you've built this camp village with all the facilities for them to, be able to work and sleep and eat and be comfortable in their off time. And some of them have like tennis courts and swimming pools. And imagine having built that in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, so that's what you just have to do when you're establishing a mine this size.
Yeah, that's impressive. I grew up in Alabama near Birmingham, and that was a big, iron processing facility. They found a lot of iron ore there early on, but by the time kind of, our age, it had pretty much played itself out. So most of the big iron smelting facilities had mostly closed down there. They were still operating, but only at like 5 or 10% of what they did, 50 or 100 years ago. So I know a lot of people that have worked in that industry, but it's been more like my parents and their grandparents that had a lot to do with it. So that's really cool though. All right. Well, let's switch gears and talk a bit about data and see what we can learn. So so start with I'll kind of run through this real quick, but I'm sure you'll relate to it, Hari. It's we talk to a lot of customers. We go to a lot of enterprise asset management types of conferences. We work real closely with Gartner and other organizations like that. And from our own data with our own customers as well as some of those external agencies, there's some stats I find really interesting. If you go in and look in your CMMS system, which I think in y'all's case is SAP, only across the board about 8% of all equipment records even have a make and model number in there. I mean, that's like an incredibly low amount. I'm sure you guys are much better based on our conversations. I know you are, but just across the board, um, you know, if you switch gears inside of SAP, the assets are managed on one side in the bill of materials, but then as you know, the materials themselves and spare parts are managed in a different system. So if you switch systems and say, okay, show me all my spare parts that are available in my material master system, you're really getting about 4% of all the spares showing up in both places, which is just, like I said, almost nothing effectively. And and then of the equipment you actually have, how many of those actually have a bill of materials, because it's really hard to track what spare parts are needed for either critical spares or just break fix maintenance unless you have all that information, and only about 10% of that have that. So this is it's like, I mean, it's something I'm always like, I've been doing this for an awful long time, but I'm always like, how do you run a business this important, this big with these kind of stats in your back end system? Do you just run it because the guys that, like you said, have been there forever and they got the hair like me? And is that how people get by with these kind of numbers? What do you think?
These numbers resonate a lot with me, Scott. I think Rohil was probably at the same level at some point time back. I see ourselves a little better than this. Like for example, uh, from a mobile equipment point of view, the CAT 793 dump truck is probably the most expensive and most critical asset for us, um, which has 30,000 spares on its own, just that one dump truck. And we probably only have around 4,000 of those spare parts cataloged in our system. I guess it's a challenge where all MRO industries face from when moving from a construction phase to an operation phase. When you're actually setting up your systems and cataloging your master data in the construction project phase, you probably only do the bare minimum. And you also probably don't catalog the equipment down to the level and down to the hierarchy where it actually makes sense for you to, capture the make, capture the model, capture the warranty, track the warranty, and use that in your maintenance process. And a lot of, especially as we're realizing that, and there's a constant kind of conscious effort to increasing and improving that. As and when maintenance processes progress, it kind of is a signal for supply chain and supply systems to start cataloging and increasing your cataloging efforts in that space.
Yeah, no, I get it. We've done some huge projects on new build, greenfield facilities, these big capital projects, and as you just said, the information handover from the EPC to the owner operator is always under pressure. You're going into commissioning, everybody wants to get going and recoup the billions they just spent, and so I think I do believe that is a big contributing factor. Absolutely. One small commercial we'll do here. If you go back 2 slides, please, Aiden. Yep, perfect. We'll jump in a second. I will make a little commercial here. For example, to help with that, Hari, we just released, there's a new standard out called CFOS. And CFOS is, I think Shell kind of pushed it originally, but the idea is how can you have standards between the EPC and the owner operators to transition all that data much more efficiently so you're not typing it in off PDFs or doing it manually. So you can get it into your system and have it, running at the same time when you go live. So that's a fairly new standard. I think they're only on version 1.1 right now, 1.2. I can't remember. I'm not the expert in it, but I think things like that will be a big help over time. They're not really in production yet, but we have, again, for anybody watching or listening, we have a new solution called CFOS for AIN with SAP. So anybody using the AIN network and SAP plant maintenance, SAP IAM, intelligent asset management, can start to do that data handover, to make that front end process better, so you're not having to play catch up on the back end. So just FYI. All right, Aiden, can we go to the next slide, please? Well, Hari, I know that you walked me through this. This is really, there's a lot here, but I think it's a very straightforward and clean version of what you guys are trying to accomplish. So I guess before you dive into this, tell me a bit more about, at Roy Hill, beginning to have this focus on data. You come into the organization. What drove that initially? What was the, where did that come from? Was it IT side, business side? And then how did you get to the point of actually saying, okay, we want to do something about it?
I think it was business-driven operations. The way we've set up our systems are rely heavily on technology, but the people who were the leaders were very acutely aware of how important technology and data itself plays a part in managing your operations, carefully. So I guess right where those systems were being put in place, if you could just go to the previous slide. So right when the systems were put in place, if you can see there on the top, that's the mind to the customer, and that's what I mentioned as the pit to port operation. So those are all what we refer to as the demand system, which is essentially customer, the iron ore consumers, essentially the steel mills in China, Japan, etc., pulling the demand for that iron ore commodity. So when these systems and departments were kind of thought of. Our organization structure was kind of built in the same way to model these systems. And essentially, how would the different systems talk to each other? So that being the demand side, our operation side then felt that, yeah, well, traditionally you would have a supply system feeding into that demand system. So for us, essentially, uh, for the demand system, the end customer being the customer of the steel mills, but for the supply system, the end customer is mainly the assets,
Yeah.
or the maintainer, So, and then traditionally, this graphic speaks to how the demand and the supply system speak to each other. Uh, Traditionally, you would see they would speak to each other only in the execution phase, as in when your demand system is actually having opportune shut windows and it's doing those maintenance campaigns, and you create these campaigner work orders. It's those work orders which flow into the supply system and I guess provide them the demand signal to provide those spare parts. What we trying to do is move the dial back and move the horizon back, not just from the execution phase, but right back to the planning phase. So if you see the 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 mine plan, the integrated mine plan and the integrated mining schedule in the demand system itself is feeding into the maintenance plans and maintenance schedules. So in a way, our demand system is integrated to our SAP PM side of the world, and that in turn is again feeding into our supply side of the world. So when we are planning our supply in terms of MRP elements and inventory optimization, we are really feeding into that this intelligence of our maintenance plans or even our mine plans. And that essentially helps us to move the inventory closer to the maintainer and move to a more demand driven approach. So that model, which allows us to link these two systems, kind of helps us to optimize our inventory, move to a more demand driven approach where you don't have to have high levels of inventory to cater for that demand. And I guess you're also able to better predict, predictive, corrective, the different forms of maintenance, and then also reduce your unplanned demand, because essentially that's the enemy for high, for your inventory. The more the unplanned demand, the higher your inventory working capital and higher levels of inventory you'll have to maintain to cater for that ad hoc demand. So this intelligence is kind of kept in play and feeds into the system and allows us to continuously improve our maintenance planning strategy. So essentially, uh, which allows us to kind of have higher upkeep, lower time between repairs, and just run this whole system more efficiently.
Gotcha. No, that's really cool. So just to play back a little bit of what you just said, what I heard you saying is one benefit is just a much more integrated and efficient handoff process on the supply and demand side, which lets you forecast better, deliver more just in time spares and other materials that you might need, probably even raw materials, I assume. And then ultimately get higher efficiency, better operational efficiency out of your equipment and your overall mine processes or anything really. I guess is that kind of the three main drivers that you guys were looking for?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you see this branch out there, which is feeding into our suppliers as well, so we consider them as part of our entire extended supply system as well. So this ability then allows us to provide those forecasts through, again, technology. We use Ariba supply chain collaboration, and IBP allows us to share forecasts with the suppliers over a 24-month time series window. So essentially, we're telling them in a year, this is when we are planning to do a major campaign or shut. You have parts for lead times, maybe close than 200 days. Now you see most of the lead times have really shot out. What was available for 30 or 40 days and now been extended out to more than 200 days, especially parts coming out of China, etc. So this allows us to provide that forecast to the suppliers who can then use it for their own planning purposes as well.
That's really cool. I mean, this looks, like I said, it reminds me of what I've seen in retail over the years with, like, Walmart and some of those people on the supply side. So it's really cool to see the same sort of approach is really paying off in some of the more heavy asset industries like you guys. So that's really cool. Um, I guess, one thing I would say is, in this whole process, I mean, at what point did you decide that the underlying data or critical master data was sort of a critical path for this project? And then I'm going to ask you a leading question. I've interviewed other, folks like yourself, and sometimes they know it up front, and it's always part of the plan. Like, we know we got to get the data right, and it's core part of what we're doing. But I've had some other projects where they start something like this and they trip because they find that the underlying data is either so incomplete or non-standard or just not there, as we talked about equipment in the field, not in the system. But they only found that out when they were part of the way through trying to do something like this. So I guess I'll put you on the spot and say, where did you guys fall in that continuum? Tell me a little about your master data journey and on the assets and suppliers and suppliers, assets and spares, I guess.
Sure, sure. So I think we, to start with, we weren't very different to, other companies who, traditionally supply chain and maintenance processes were seen as silos, and even the master data objects were kind of treated in silos. And people didn't really understand the linkage between spare parts and how they kind of interact with your maintenance plans and task lists and bombs, etc. So I guess we started with going about trying to catalog our data independently without those two different streams talking to each other. So what we were missing was more like a master data center of excellence where people really understand the significance of data and the life cycle of that data. So traditionally we started with that, and we realized that we're obviously there are a lot of things that we are not able to achieve. For example, we're able to catalog a spare part, but we're not assigning it to the BOM at that time because we probably don't know to assign or probably don't have the technology to assign. And then the same thing when, simple processes like when you're superseding a material, you need to be able to remove that material from the existing related data objects, but they're all broken down to independent, different activities rather than having one simple, life cycle approach for the data. So we caught on to that. Leaders caught on to that very fast. That's where we need to be able to have to read the whole life cycle of data and see it for what it is as one flow across this entire system. And we went about doing a solution evaluation at that time around 2014 or so. What we decided was to build something bespoke in-house. So which kind of led us to do a lot of product development, and we are traditionally miners, not software developers, I would say, but I would say we still made a very good job of developing our own in-house MDM platform. But it was always an initial proof of concept, trying to prove that we can stand up that platform and then further expose it and expand it to other master data objects. But I guess the architecture and technology of it and the momentum which help us to stand up the platform, you need that momentum to keep going. And then being a mining company, you have other focuses and priorities. So we found that the architecture to be too complex. We had people attrition, and we lost some skills in helping us to maintain that. So we were at a point where we realized that we probably need to be looking at a simpler way of doing this rather than standing up this entire developing this whole platform on our own and also trying to support it on our own, because that's not our core business. So we went about doing a solution evaluation, and the key things that we were looking for when we were selecting an MDM platform was one, which was well adopted in the industry, and there were use cases similar to ours in the MRO field. Two, which was easy to maintain. So we were looking for a low code, no code platform where you don't have to traditionally write lines and lines of code. You could kind of do it through the admin console itself. A lot of the things like changing UIs or adding tooltips, etc. Three, traditionally a SaaS model where we can give the job of maintaining the platform for us, or outsource the job of maintaining the platform for us. So I guess those were the three main things. And when we further dug down into asking the business, well, what are the features that you would like to see in an optimal master data platform? And then came out, the wish list, like, yeah, we want to be able to catalog a spare part, assign it to a BOM, also maybe, and also have those composite requests. So when you're cataloging a functional location, it should be able to assign it to that equipment, also assign it to the BOM. So you're able to create all those linked master data objects in one flow. And we realized, and we went through these really rigorous demo sessions with the different products that we had selected as a shortlist. Uh, and Prospector came through, so a lot of those initial asks were kind of demonstrated to us in the demo phase itself. The team was able to go back quickly, set up the system, and come back and show it to us in the demo that this is what you meant and this is what you're looking for. So that was really powerful to see how easy it was to configure those processes, and how easy it was also to configure, I guess, the governance framework, because that was also one big pain point from our side. We were looking to shift our governance process in master data cataloging from a one-up approver approach to a more like a champion network. And for that, traditionally, we needed again a low-code platform where we can easily, create those workflows and amend those workflows. So yeah, and it kind of finally that's how we landed on Prospector after having gone through that, quite a rigorous solution evaluation phase, I would say.
Very cool, man. Thank you for telling me about that. That makes me very happy to hear that those are things you picked up on, because those are things we work very hard across the company to to build for our it's our 20th year in business, and focus in the heavy asset industries, focused on things like spare parts and asset, which are as a data domain are not as focused on as by some of the other big vendors. So we're glad that came through with you guys, and like I said, really appreciate you guys putting your faith in us, and now we just gotta deliver and finish the project with you guys. So tell you what, let's switch gears. Aiden, why don't we go on to the next slide? I know there's a lot of good content here. Let's see what else. Any real feedback on this one, Hari?
Yeah, so this was traditionally trying to show, the flow of parts in using the supply chain operation reference model, of how the parts and the different types of parts flow in our supply system. And the colors mainly represent the different types of maintenance, whether it's a breakdown, a corrective, or a repairable, which is essentially goes through the whole circuit and comes back as a repaired again from the supplier. So yeah, and the triangles represent the different stages of inventory as it flows through, and the blocks are the processes in each phase. So for example, if it's within the supplier block, you have the all the sourcing processes, the repair processes, and the dispatch processes. So essentially your inventory is flowing through the dispatch and the repair process to us. Within the supply chain, which is our internal supply chain logistics warehouse space, we would be initially receiving the inventory in our distribution center, which is based in Perth, which we treat as, and I will take you to that supply chain maintenance topology, which will be easier to understand. The distribution center, traditionally in most mining companies, at least in Australia, we treat that as a transportation and distribution center. It's not a storage distribution center. So traditionally, we don't stock a lot of parts there. We cross-stock parts to our mine sites because we have, plenty of space or land in the mine sites for setting up those huge warehouses, which is slightly different to an oil and gas setup where you don't have that much space in the oil rigs. So your main supply hub would be also your storage and distribution center. So I guess this is where traditionally your supply processes differ between the mining value chain and an oil and gas value chain.
Quick
So
question. Sorry, not to interrupt, but just before I forget, I got a little quick. If I heard you mention three major organizations, and I can see them right here. You've got, essentially, like I said, your procurement and suppliers. I'm sorry, procurement and sourcing side. You've got your warehouse and inventory management side, and then you've got your end user consumers that are actually the folks that are doing the maintenance and the break fix and preventative and all the different types of maintenance you've got listed here at the
yep.
mine site itself. Across those three groups, for you guys, I mean, who owns something like this? Is it equally split? Is it owned by one particular group? Kind of walk me through that just a little bit. I'm just curious, how that plays out into the real world.
I think, yeah, so which is why again it was very important for us to be talking systems rather than departments. So we see this entire how this plays out as the supply system, and we have stakeholders at the supply system level, which are represented by again managers from supply chain, managers from maintenance, and managers from our contracts and procurement side. So, and it's really, the peas in a pod. Even the way um, we sit in pods, and within each pod, you would have people represented from contracts and supply, the procurement space, the supply chain space, and the maintenance space.
Like
So
literally like physically sitting next to each other when they're in the office or in the facility at the
physically,
mine.
exactly, physically
Wow, that's
sitting
really cool.
together. Yeah, instead of just supply chain sitting all on its own and contract sitting all on its own, they're all kind of sitting very close by and sitting in pods so that you're essentially talking amongst yourself within the system. And how they really split up is ownership of assets. So for example, when we move to the next part, we'll see there are 3 or 4 main asset categories. You have mobile equipment, you have fixed, you have linear, you have rail track. So there are people who are servicing your assets, because asset again is your customer and customer is God. So we treat everything as broken down from the asset point of view. So contracts and procurement people servicing that specific line of assets or family of assets, supply chain or schedulers and planners dealing with those assets, and then maintenance planners, and reliability engineers again dealing with those specific family of assets. They all sit together.
Cool.
That
Can we
allows
take a
us
look
to
at
kind
that?
of get this.
Can we take a look at that on your next slide?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So this you would see where if you move from the right side of the slide towards the left, you're essentially moving from the mine plant and the process plant. So the PSA is the processing plant and MSA is the mine plant, and they're very closely located to each other in the Pilbara. You can see the desert in the background there. That's traditionally where all your heavy equipment, your assets are. It doesn't really show your all your crushers and stackers, etc., because this is traditionally this view is from a warehouse process point of view, but essentially tells you who are the main customers for the supply system. So all your assets are there in PSA, MSA. We also have something called the WIMS plant, which is one of its kind in the world. It's probably the first in Australia and second in the world. It's called a wet high intensity magnetic separator plant, which allows us to, further break down those small chunks of iron ore into fines, which traditionally would have ended up in the tailings dam, but it just allows us to salvage more out of our. And that was a new project because we already went through this process. We realized now when you're setting up the new project, it's important to catalog those spare parts right in the beginning. So it wasn't something which we started in the project. But anyways, so there if you see the PSA and MSA is connected to a rail track which is there on top, connecting to our port and rail. RTY is nothing but our port and rail warehouse, which is in Port Hedland. So that's about 344 kilometers of train track running from PSA to the RTY warehouse. And that's essentially where our Port Hedland is situated. But like I said, this is a view from a warehouse point of view. And in the center is all our different warehouses. To start with, we have RHDC, which is the distribution center, as I was saying, in Perth, but it's only a transportation cross-docking warehouse. All our site warehouses, which are located closer to these to the process plant and mine plant and port and rail are the actual stocking warehouses. And then it tells you about the different flows of supply of the spare parts that could happen. It could either be an international courier coming in directly from Port Hedland, or could come in through sea freight via Fremantle, or could be just a local, our own 3PL picking up from a local vendor and supplying either to the Perth RHDC in the bottom, or supplying directly to one of those mine plants and process plants. So this is what traditionally was our supply system topology, which drives again the data and cataloging of how we what MRP values do we use, what stocking strategy or inventory strategy do we use, again further going into how do we catalog our equipment and assets. So you would see this knowledge of the supply, of the different aspects of the supply chain and maintenance, then flowing into the data aspects of this as well.
Cool. That's very cool. And it makes total sense to me. All right, Aiden, can we go on to the next slide? Yeah, here we go. So, so maybe this will be a good chance to kind of segue a bit. I mean, and Hari, that was wonderful. I mean, I think we'll have a very clear sense, at least I do, of how you guys approach this, the system approach, the pit to port kind of, and again, as you said, we often find these kind of silos between those three organizations we talked about, and you guys seem to, with your everything from like I said, where they literally sit in the office or at the plant to how you do things. And I think those are all really innovative. I probably worked on 20 or 25 of these projects myself for the last decade, and seeing various aspects. So I'd say you guys are definitely upper quartile in how you're approaching this, just very quickly. So that's awesome. I'm gonna again kind of step in for a second. And I'll ask you some questions here, but fundamentally, I mean, when you're coming to any sort of master data program, it's always sort of the same thing. First, you got to figure out what's wrong with your data. Is it missing? Is it inaccurate? Is it non-standard? Whatever the case may be. Then you've got to go through a data improvement process, as you talked about, to get it up to. And again, we talk a lot about what clean data. Well, clean can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I had a project not too long ago where we were told to start with one facility because they had the best data just across the company, these guys. And what come to find out that in their 23-year-old Oracle ERP system they were using just at that facility, the data was perfect because it was fit to purpose, right? It fit the system just right. They had processes in place. But then when you said, okay, we're actually consolidating master data for materials across, I don't know, 67 different facilities all over the world that were in 20 something different ERP systems or versions of ERPs, they lost their minds because we said, well, the data is about 62% accurate for, but it was for the new SAP system, the S4 system. And so, data is very much about, not just have you done a good job in your context, but how does it roll up? How do you manage it? So clean's always a very interesting standard, but you do have to clean it up. You got to add missing stuff. And then the last piece is you got to keep it clean and make sure that it doesn't go bad again. And that's where you get into all the stuff you were talking about, being able to build those business processes in a no-code fashion, add a new business rule, change the routing, work across domains to different experts versus being stuck just in the maintenance system and that master data, or being stuck just in the supply chain system. Is there any of these areas that you guys really focused on the most, or you thought you got the most value out of, or is it all, again, because it's end-to-end processes, it was the whole thing?
I think all of them, Scott. So what we realized was, for example, just for when I start to search for, maybe one of the most common spare parts in our catalog, O-rings or hoses, you just end up with 100 different hoses, not knowing which hose is for what. And that again speaks to not being able to use the UNSPSC standards to build our naming descriptions. And then again, that's what we plan to do as part of this project, which is so brilliant, where you can link up with the UNSPSC and it helps you to kind of define your description basis the industry standard for that UNSPSC code. So these are all kind of innovations I guess we knew where we wanted to go, but we didn't have the technology enablers in place to be able to achieve that. So again, moving from a very high proportion of free text uh, to be able to catalog different parts. But then again, how do we identify how many times are we procuring? Because we had a rule in place, if you're procuring it for the third time, you catalog it. We're now changing it to you probably catalog it every second time you buy it. But how then do you identify that it is the part that you're buying it for the second time if you don't have the correct descriptions in place, etc., even if it's for a free text item, or you have some analytics in place which kind of tracks that and then feeds that into a center of excellence, which then further is responsible for getting that cataloged, and then further feeding it into the consuming systems, into task lists and plans, etc. So yeah, and apart from that, I think one very cool feature which I really realized was the passive data governance, um, of helping to, once you've set up those rules, helping to clean up your existing data, um, and just on the fly, and then keep doing it once it's reaches that standard. Because you see, once in business, once you have you set up a rule, you stand up a technology or an application, and you just start cataloging data, your master data team doesn't really find time to go back and check and improve their existing data. They're just so flooded by these constant data requests. To be able to identify redundancy in those requests and even cleanse your existing data was really a kind of a real step up for us in terms of technology enablement.
Cool. No, one thing you mentioned I thought was really interesting there. Prior to my career, prior to my SAP days, I would work for an analytics company, but in the same area. And one thing that I think doesn't get talked about enough, even by us, is we're so focused on the core processes in SAP and operational data, but that analytics side of it, right? If you do your UNSPC coding correctly on the material side, you do your ISO 14224 on the equipment side, all of a sudden you got full spend analytics you can do, right? You can really look on the procurement side and see where are we spending the money, where is the leakage, how do we get better prices and do global negotiations. So I think the operational data is critical because that's improving processes and saving money. But the analytics side, and I was just glad that you mentioned analytics because I think that's a thing that doesn't get talked about quite enough in these circumstances. But there's a lot of money to be saved by rolling up the data once it's all clean and being able to look at what you're doing and how to do it better. So I agree.
Absolutely.
Good. Aiden, next slide, please. Yeah, I think this shows some representations. If it's okay with you guys, interest of time, I think we'll move ahead. But this really just talks about all the different types of records that are out there. The great news for anybody that's watching out there, and I'm sure Hari would talk to you about this if you were interested. But the support that MDO, the platform, has for all the different types of materials out there, raw materials, finished goods, spare parts, and the flexibility to manage that and work across that. And again, particularly for SAP clients, you get that trickiness of like, hey, I want to put a new equipment into service or swap one out. There's something you got to do in plant maintenance. You've got to go in the financial side of the system, to depreciate it. You've got to build that BOM in plant maintenance, but then you got to flip over to Material Master to do the spares. So it's a complicated process just to say, hey, I got one generator and I'm replacing it with a new one because it's broken or aged or depreciated. So there's a lot going on there. So I think this just speaks to that. So, and these are the kind of results you're looking for. Hari, are these the results that you guys are targeting, or this is sort of the general kind of cross-platform, cross-company kind of roll-up data that we can see? I apologize, I just put you on the spot. Is this your results that you're trying to achieve, or is this more generic industry content here?
I think this is more generic, Scott, maybe from your own experience, but we do look at these metrics. Definitely from a work order completion point of view, right parts cataloged at the right time and with the right inventory stocking strategy allows you to complete your maintenance schedules in time. So then again, one of the main KPIs for us for our supply system. I've already spoken about inventory stockpiling. We're actually we've embarked on an inventory optimization project as well, which is implementing of IBP in our demand planning and IO phases. So some of the inputs from IBP and vice versa into our MDM platform are so important because IBP helps us to identify that planned and unplanned composition, and then also helps to feedback those inputs into the maintenance plans and task lists that you're constantly buying this for that asset. You might as well go and catalog it for that asset. Might as well go and catalog this free text. So those are inputs which are coming in to us from, again, the IBP and the analytics system, which helps us essentially to drive our inventory stockpile. There is a specific business case that we have around quite a few millions of dollars to reduce of inventory using that concept. Yeah, so it definitely resonates for us.
Perfect.
And
Yeah,
probably
thanks.
what we haven't covered is for us, I guess, just a simple metric for especially for Royal organization, 1 hour of asset downtime costs us about $1 million,
Wow.
and that's on average. I think for in the MRO industry, that varies from $1 million to about 2.5 million of asset downtime per hour. So you can imagine this. This is probably one of the most important KPIs for us in the supply system.
Thank you. No, that's great. Thank that. I knew you guys had some good solid business case behind what you were doing and some good solid metrics. So I appreciate that. And at the end of the day, all that sort of stuff, as you said, is I was talking to somebody and they're like, well, we work in other data domains, and it's really hard to get a business case. And I'm like, I've been doing this, like I said, for about 10 years now in the heavy asset industry space, and I've never had customers, once they admit that it's a problem and have identified that there's a way to solve it, they've never had a lot of trouble getting money to fix it. Because again, like you said, whether it's an extra 3 days of downtime and a shutdown turnaround for a refinery, for you guys having to helicopter in one expensive piece of equipment that you didn't have on site for an unplanned breakage, or I had a customer that was more on the manufacturing side that I was talking about earlier. These guys had acquired 37 companies in I think 20 or 30 years, as they grew and had grown very, very rapidly. They let everybody run their own P&L, and then they started to centralize for obvious reasons, for cost and efficiency. They had 34 million material master records across those different systems. I mean, I think we ultimately got them down as part of their PLM rollout and some master data projects to about 3 million, out of that. So 90% of the data they were storing in their systems, people were updating on site, working with all the time, was just unneeded, redundant, so you guys right now, at least, to keep expanding, have the single sites. That makes it easier, but for them it was all about that comparison. So there's a lot of different use cases for this stuff, but that was great. So I think at this point, I've got a super clear idea of what you have done at Roy Hill, and the project you've undertaken and the trust you've given us. So maybe we should take a second here and look over here and see if any of the attendees have asked us any questions along the way. And of course, anybody out there, if you haven't asked a question yet, please feel free to go ahead and type it into the chat window, and Aiden will pick it up for us and feed it across. And maybe Hari, we can take a few questions from the audience and see what they have to say. So give me just a second here, put my glasses on and not click on the wrong button, and take a quick look. All right. So Hari had a question here, and actually kind of, on the opposite of what I just said about not needing a business case. The question is, again, is how long did you guys talk about this before you started doing it? How did you approach it? And how did you ultimately get the funding to begin your project?
I think, yeah, so we probably would have spoken about it briefly in our chat today, Scott. It was what we wanted to achieve was pretty much clear when we actually set up the system view of thinking. The technology, the process was kind of locked down when you created that system view. It was, I guess, when we had to actually choose a different platform apart from our own in-house bespoke platform, we probably didn't have a choice. We we were down that path where we were, kind of just look very quickly, swiftly looking for swapping our platform with something which was easier to maintain. And we're also kind of expanding now, so our asset base is increasing and our spare parts inventory is increasing. So, and we were finding there are a lot of wastage and redundancies, in our processes, because the current platform was not up fit for purpose for to be able to do that up to that. So that was the business case. Uh, how do we ensure that we have the right parts at the right time so that we can, service our assets to the best SLA possible. So that's what kind of led to the supply system leaders, quickly endorsing the business case that we put up in front of them after running it through its regular paces of technology, architecture, board approval, going through the different SOC 2 requirements, etc., and having gone through the business requirements phase. It was a very quick win with a leadership when we put up the business case in front of them.
Cool. So to some degree, you guys already knew this was a problem. You had put a solution in place, but then over time, as you said, for lack of upgrading and just, again, as you said, not being a software company, this was the next go around saying, well, we already have proved we have a problem. We have a solution that's been working, but we want to do these new things with it. We want it to be more agile and whatever. So it sounds like you sort of already had done the business case stuff the first go round, and it was just an increment, not just, it was still, I'm sure, a lot of discussions, but an incremental improvement to something you'd already solved.
Yep.
And you want to solve it just with some COTS, SaaS software, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. All right, let's see what else we got here. Hold on. This says you talked a lot about the cooperation between the various business partners on the business side. Obviously, this is an IT initiative. Can you talk a bit about the role that IT versus the business and how you guys collaborate?
Well, actually, we had, in terms of business process SMEs, we had a lot of involvement from business embedded within our technology teams. And when we say IT, it wasn't the traditional IT in the BAU sense. So we still needed those for keeping our lights on. So we had a lean technology team that we brought on board, which was, we're talking about the initial phase. And there was a lot of business involvement because we were, trying to stand up an entire new platform on its own and build a new platform. That's completely maybe not, you don't need that level of engagement when we're implementing something like, MDO Prospecta. The level of engagement here is probably from a technology side. We have only fronted a solution architect and a business analyst, and you probably, if you want to run lean, you could probably have a business analyst / training change analyst, and you probably would need some business process SMEs from the spares side and from the asset side. That's all you would need, because all the other aspects of building the solution, creating those test scripts and training artifacts for the solution, etc., are all kind of the responsibility of the Prospecta development team. You are running hand in hand with them, but you probably only need that lean team from technology and business point of view to be able to make the project successful.
Cool. So the SaaS nature of the MDO platform really did help you guys minimize your IT involvement, in terms of like stuff you had to do beyond just the workflow and the processes, which you guys clearly already had well defined.
Definitely, I think we were able to cut down from when we traditionally built our own existing MDM platform. We had a project team strength of something like 25 to 30 people.
Wow.
We were able to cut that down to literally 4 or 5 people now implementing MDO Prospecta.
That's another very strong value driver, and there's some money to be saved there. So we love to hear that. One last question here. I think we've got time for one more. Let's see. This says, Hari, great information and presentation. Thank you. Any lessons learned or things you do differently if you had to do it again?
Well, it really depends on timing. Had I been there, we probably would have, advocated an industry standard solution like this to start with. But there, I guess we already had kind of learned our lessons, and we kind of using that in this project because of the cycle of maturity that we had reached. Um, so it's just probably want to spell out. It's important, very important to engage with the business process stakeholders, because this is not a technology project. It's primarily a business driven project enabled by technology. It comes down to who owns your supply system processes and who owns your master data. You would always find the ownership of master data, if you like it or not, probably rests with the business, and they are probably also responsible and accountable for ensuring you have the right data cataloged to make your business processes run efficiently. And I see technology as an enabler to get this process through, but you'd probably want to keep the ownership and the stakeholders very firmly rooted within the business.
Perfect. That's great. Great. Well, guys, looking at the clock, I think we're just about at time. So first off, Hari, thank you so much. From me personally, from Perspecta, we sure appreciate you taking time out of your clearly what's a very busy schedule to spend some time with us and your fellow customers. We hope maybe later this year when we get around to doing our user group down on the Gold Coast, we get to hear from we get to hear from you again and meet you in person. So that'll be great. So thank you for educating us all today and sharing some of the Roy Hill successes and journey you've been on. To everybody else, thanks to you guys for taking an hour out of your day. Again, I personally appreciate it, and we appreciate it at Perspecta, and we hope to keep working with you as customers or prospects and help you learn more about the MDO platform and how to achieve similar successes to what Roy Hill and many of our other customers around the world have found with MDO and with Perspecta. So with that, thanks very much to everybody. Hari, thanks one last time, and we'll talk to you. Yep, we'll talk to you guys in about a month about, I think data as a service is our next topic. So look forward to talking to you guys again. So thanks everyone, and have a good day / evening. Take care.
See ya.